Creation on Demand. It had been a busy, hectic 8 months since Beyond the Winning Streak had rolled off the production line. Stan and I had been immersed in the job of running Sethwork International, which would give birth to the same month as the book. We had set our priorities and were comfortable with them, but now it was time to transfer some of our focus onto Winning Streak. Being the marketing portion of our team of two, I set my mind's wheels in motion in search of the ideas for promotion pieces. 2 days later, Stan realized we were running low on book inventory, so he visited the commercial warehouse where Winning Streak is stored. For the first time, he was invited to enter the cavernous building and help load the requested cartons onto a dolly. After lifting a few boxes off the storage pallet, Stan saw a package wrapped in butcher paper that had been covered by the book cartons. Opening it up, he discovered it held 250 flattened Winning Streak covers. The logical explanation was that they had been shipped with the books 8 months previously, as I may have decided way back then that they would make good marketing pieces. But neither Stan nor I could remember placing such an order. A day or two later, before we checked the paperwork on Winning Streak's initial print order, we discussed the covers with the committee. Big surprise, according to them. The covers were created on the pallet the day I decided I wanted promotion pieces. They also said this type of event is not uncommon. In fact, it's normal operating procedure in our reality. And, they said, don't waste your time hunting up old paperwork because it would have been altered in the past. A quick refresher course in creation. We are consciousness which constantly creates. With each thought and emotion, we emit electromagnetic energy units that join with others of similar characteristics. The size of the mass that is created from this joining and its propensity or purpose suggests the outline of an event that will eventually enter this reality. That event is selected by us from the field of probabilities in Framework 2. Our inner self then forms and inserts the event into physical reality, where it enters our life and is placed where appropriate, past, present, or future. Not all remembered past experiences are reshaped by the present. Some hold their contours through the moments as they were originally defined. It all depends on how we're feeling and what we believe in the present that will impact the past. Anything we wish to experience must first be formed in the mind. We create working models within our thoughts, and then they enter physical reality as actualized events or objects. From depression to excitement, from money to lack thereof, from loneliness to lovingness. It all comes about because of what we think and believe right now. The point of power is in the present, and if that's the case, thought is the key to that power. Betty's Slate of Mind. If we create our own realities, can there be differences between what you see and what I see? Seth says we telepathically agree on how a scene will look, and then we individually build that scene in our separate space continuums. But, he says, we add our own touches that may not coincide exactly with the creations of others. If our touches become too far removed from the joint consensus, we're called crazy because we're seeing things others don't. But in everyday life, little differences happen all the time and are usually attributed to forgetfulness or mistakes. Norman Friedman, author of Bridging Science and Spirit, an excellent book that compares Seth's material to renowned physicist David Bohm's theories, has been a frequent guest speaker at Seth Network conferences. With Betty Keelty, a former British vice consul in Seattle, feeding him questions, Norm explains how the Seth material meets and exceeds the present theories held by quantum physicists. But this story is Betty's, and it has to do with how we each create our own realities with different interpretations of similar physical matter. As usual, when it was time to start what unofficially came to be called the Norm and Betty Show, Betty prepared the props for their casual stage chat. When she couldn't find a copy of Norm's book handy, she walked to the Converse bookstore at the back of the room, picked up the book she wanted, and asked the salesperson if she could borrow it for an hour or so. Then Betty proceeded to walk to the stage and finalize her preparations. As part of her introduction of Norm, Betty did her usual. She held up his book so the audience could see it. But this time, an odd thing happened when she lifted the book aloft. The audience started laughing. Betty, not knowing what was so funny, ignored the outburst. The audience, thinking Betty was British deadpanning, chuckled even more. They thought it was pretty cute that Betty had pulled a joke on Norm by holding up my book, Beyond the Winning Streak, instead of his. The show finally closed and I approached Betty, I still laughing at her little joke, and she still not knowing what was so funny. When I realized she was sincere, I told her what happened. No, she insisted. It was Norm's book she held up. No, it was mine, I said. Impossible, she said. Betty had read and reread Norm's book, had written a book review on it, had previously used it on stage, had carried it in her luggage, and laid it on her bedside table. And yet she mistook a white book for a well-loved blue one? Or did she create in her reality a blue book from a white book? Another Betty story, this one explained by the committee. In preparation for her second Norm and Betty show, Betty asked Slate Network to send her a copy of an audio tape made at the first conference she and Norm had done together, so she could study her presentation. Off it went in the mail. Back came a phone call to Slate Network. The tape, it seems, was blank. Off went another tape, and it was recorded properly, according to Betty. But according to the committee, so was the first. They said Betty chose not to materialize the data on the original tape. I asked them if I listened to it, would I hear the recorded information? No, they said. You would have reflected Betty's reality, and you would agree to her rules. They added that there was one probability where Betty wouldn't hear the words on the tape, yet I would. But you see what a dilemma that would cause? Perfect mystery. Back to the humorous story of the nuns that I mentioned in On a Moment's Notice. Okay, so I created the perfect faith part of the book when I needed it. Does that mean the original manuscript of the story now includes the new material? The committee says indeed it does, at least in my reality. And what does that mean to the people who read the book before I purchased it? It seems anyone with whom I will come in contact who has read or will read the book will agree that perfect faith is an important part of the story. Don't forget whose reality they're reflecting. Traffic woes. So does you create your own reality mean that if we're in the midst of, say, a traffic jam, we can uncreate the mass of stalled cars? There are always many probabilities surrounding any event, and we have the opportunity and we have the option of initiating the ones we choose. It's true, our beliefs and feelings must be in alignment with our desire, but given that statement, yes, it's a possibility. Once I tried it on a Los Angeles freeway. While Stan drove, I visualized intensely and worked at suspending my belief that it would take 2 hours to go 40 miles. The traffic did clear within a reasonable time frame and we passed through the city with relative ease. But why do I think I impacted that situation? Surely it was a coincidence. Well, not if I create my own reality. That means I put myself into the traffic jam and I got myself out of it. The tough part is suspending a belief held by the masses that Los Angeles is a nightmare for drivers. We telepathically pick up on others' thoughts and accept them as our reality. Not that we have to, it's just easier than the effort it sometimes takes to set a mass belief aside and build one of our own. We acquiesce to others' beliefs all the time. That doesn't mean we can create a reality where Los Angeles is free of automobiles, but it does mean we can create one where we sometimes flow freely and happily through what others experience as hell on earth. Plastic events. When we're attempting to work with universal ideas far outside the norm of acceptance, it takes a certain diligence of thought. It's easy to feel powerless to change a situation. After all, that's how we felt since birth. What takes persistence is the development of the idea that what we see and experience is more plastic than concrete. Successes help to solidify our budding belief, successes that are noted as such and not sloughed off as fate, luck, or happenstance. One day I drove into the back end of stop-and-go traffic on an Oregon interstate, 4 miles from the next exit. I mentally asked for help out of the mess, not sure I believed anything could really be done at that point except to tough it out. I happened to be in a far left lane and on impulse moved into the right lane, a position I almost never choose. Shortly thereafter, I noticed a truck about 1/4 of a mile in front of me leaving the highway, heading into what looked like a field. As I drew closer, I saw that it was a temporary road used by work crews, and it connected with a secondary road that would lead me to a pleasant country detour. With no concern for the highway patrol, I also left the freeway at that point. Later, I got to thinking about the structure of the event and wondered if I'd created the road in response to my need. No, the committee said, you didn't. But according to them, I did bring the temporary exit into my reality by merging my need, the impulse to move to the right so I could see the departing truck and eventually follow it, and the conditions of the exit, meaning it wasn't barricaded to traffic, into my reality. A twist to the real estate shortage. A question we asked the committee one time had to do with the formation of large objects in our reality. Stan and I were driving in the country one day and hit a strip of road where there were no houses for about 15 miles. We were discussing simultaneous time, and Stan said he assumed that a house could appear on that barren strip in the present, just as Winning Streak's book covers had materialized on the warehouse pallet. I wasn't sure, so we asked the committee that night. Yes, they said, one could. And everyone who drives that road regularly would swear it had been there for 50 years, and it would look it. Leeway, great and small. Near our home in southern Washington is a very large white-tailed deer refuge, many miles in diameter. I can't count the times I've walked across the refuge, a singular human surrounded by pastoral scenes of nature and animals. I use my time alone to refocus my thinking and, at times, visualize goals. That refuge is also where I taught myself to alter the weather. In Beyond the Winning Streak, I told of my ability to hold off the rain while out walking my trail. But I drew an incorrect conclusion as to why I was able to alter the weather out there. I wrote that I assumed it was due to 2 factors. One was because I put emotion behind my desire and then visualized the outcome. And the second was that my thoughts and beliefs, far from the minds and bodies of other humans, were not in conflict with mass beliefs about how the weather could manifest that day. But factor number 2 was in error. It's my reality, and I can hold off the rain if I want to, and if I believe I can. I don't have to be inside of others to send their thought patterns. Telepathy is our main mode of communication. if you remember the discussion in the 180-degree turn, and space has nothing to do with the clarity of perception. Since we actually exist in different space continuums anyway, telepathy is our tool for merging our realities into a semblance of similarity. Therefore, I knew what others were assuming about the weather, but I disregarded the input and decided to strike out on my own. The committee says it's just as easy for individuals to change weather patterns in New York City as it is in rural Washington. But I don't know. I mean, what is this? Our own personal realities or something? When we visit or live in a certain area of the world, we automatically accept its weather parameters. We expect Hawaii to be free of snow and the North Pole to be free of palm trees. These are root assumptions held by our race, and we normally don't tamper with them. But within those general parameters, there's great leeway in what we will and will not create as our own. Stan called me in Washington one day from Oregon. "I heard on the news you had one heck of a snowstorm," he said. "No, it was sunny and relatively warm," I replied. "Must have been a microcosm of special weather over your part of the land," he suggested. I wonder, I thought. What did the others in our country experience that day? Did some live through a snowstorm and some don sunglasses? According to the committee, there's always that possibility. Like everything else in our private reality, they say we create the weather to suit our needs and desires, and everyone with whom we come in contact will verify our version of reality. But we usually keep our creations somewhat aligned with the masses. Nonetheless, they are our individual versions. If there are 5 versions of a table when 5 people enter a room, then there are 3,000 versions of a stadium when 3,000 people attend a high school football game, and there are billions of versions of weather across the planet at any given moment. It can't be any other way, based on the structure of physical reality. Otherwise, we would be victims, if only to nature. The winter of 1994-1995 was one of the mildest in recent history in the Northwest, or so I heard. I know in my reality it was. I asked the committee if I'd created my version of the winter in order to help protect and safeguard the health of the many cats and kittens who call our Washington property home. They said the reason didn't matter. What was more important was that I realized I'd done it. True confessions. While we're at it, I drew another erroneous conclusion in Winning Streak that begs clarification. This fact has been mentioned many times already in this book, but here it is again. We cannot be impacted by another's energy unless we allow it to occur. In Winning Streak, I told the story of Tammy, a participant in one of our workshops, who became the guinea pig for an experiment in energy impact. As a group, we purposely created a negative state of mind in a conference room, while Tammy, not consciously knowing what was going on, patiently waited in the hall. When she entered the room, she immediately felt uneasy. Within a minute or so, while continuing with the process, she burst into tears, and later said she felt as though she'd been hit in the solar plexus. We're back to asking, what really happened? Was Tammy the victim of our group negativity, as we concluded, or was she a victim of her own? The exterior events surely seem to point out our villainy. But when held to the light of universal structure, our conclusion falls apart. First of all, telepathy is always at play between people, even if they don't realize it. It's how we stay in contact with each other's reality, how we know what's going on in each other's space continuum. Secondly, every event in which we participate is after the fact. We try it on for size, so to speak, in framework 2 before it enters our reality as a finished product. So, Tammy knew what was happening in the conference room long before she physically entered it. She gathered data, she decided what she wanted to accomplish based on her beliefs, and she chose the probability that matched her desire. We, as the audience, did the same, and together we created proof of vulnerability to outside forces. Are we so fragile that we can be destroyed by a witch doctor's curse or a medical doctor's statement that our disease is terminal? Are we so frail that we can fall under the spell of cults or other people's thoughts? The only question of validity is who creates whose reality and on what is it construction based? The day the rains came. One day, as I started my walk in the deer refuge, I glanced tiredly at the ominous sky. Oh no, I thought, I'm going to have to stop the rain today and I'm just not up to it. Usually, when my feet hit the path, all becomes right in my world, no matter what frame of mind followed me to the refuge. But today was different. A chill wind blew at my thin jacket. I'd left my gloves at home. I was weary and cranky. With resignation, I erected the glass ceiling in my thoughts, the prop I mentally used to block the rain, but I had to strain to keep it in place. In other words, I couldn't hold the focus on what I wanted to accomplish. I kept at it, but grew more tired with each step. The sky was dark and the wind continued, but no rain fell. Finally, after about half a mile, I couldn't go on. For the first time since I taught myself how to block the rain, I said to hell with it and turned around to head back to the car. Not 15 seconds later, the first water droplets hit. By the time I tugged on the driver's door, I was a soaked mess. What happened? I dropped my belief that I could accomplish the task I set for myself, and when I did, I changed probabilities almost instantly. The committee said later, "See what happens when you give up?" Quite a lesson for us all, is it not? Whistling winds. I'm working on another aspect of weather control now, although I don't have my technique perfected, it seems. One day on the deer refuge, the wind whipped itself into a small frenzy, and I decided to see what I could do about halting it. For an hour, I visualized the wind abating, using the same technique I applied to hold off the rain. Nothing much happened until I was just minutes from the end of my walk, and then it quieted down. I felt my experiment was a failure, or at least inconclusive. But the committee said I did have an impact on the wind and reminded me of lulls throughout my walk and the wind's abatement at the end. They also suggested that I modify my technique because I didn't quite believe the same process I use for deterring rain would work for wind. And belief is all important.